All right, today we are diving into a story that has honestly haunted American culture for decades. We're going to peel back the layers and try to separate the Hollywood horror from the horrifying reality of a man named Ed Gein. His story has inspired everything from that hit TV show everyone's talking about to some of the biggest horror movies ever made. I mean, one name just echoes through them all. And it's because his crimes, they were so bizarre, they literally became the blueprint for our nightmares. But that's the thing, right? With so much fiction built around this guy, you have to wonder, how much of what we've seen on screen is actually true? Well, that is exactly what we're going to dig into today. It's funny, even Ryan Murphy, the co-creator of that new series, pointed this out. He said Gein is probably one of the most influential people of the 20th century, and yet people don't know that much about him. And that's the paradox, isn't it? His influence is massive, but the real facts of his life, they're often completely buried under the monsters he inspired.
So to really get a handle on this, we've got to go back to the very beginning, on a really isolated farm out in Plainfield, Wisconsin.
Okay, so this family dynamic, wow. It was a total perfect storm of dysfunction. You had his father, George, who was a violent alcoholic, and then his mother, Augusta, who was so religious, she preached that all women were basically instruments of the devil, and they were all stuck on this isolated farm. This wasn't just his home. For Ed Gein, this was his entire reality.
And then, bam! In just 5 short years, his whole world just completely fell apart. His father dies, then his brother, and finally his mother, who was, let's be real, the absolute center of his universe. She's gone too. So there he is, 39 years old, completely and utterly alone in that farmhouse, with nothing but his mother's twisted teachings rattling around in his head.
All right, so this is pretty much where that TV series we mentioned picks up his story. But this is also where things start to get a little fuzzy, where Hollywood's love for drama starts to blur the lines. So let's do it. Let's separate the fact from the fiction. First on the list, the whole accomplice thing. The show makes it seem like Adeline Watkins was his longtime girlfriend, his partner in crime. The reality? Not so much. She did tell this wild story at first about a 20-year romance, but she took it back almost immediately. She said she only knew him as a quiet and polite friend. So, bottom line, there was no accomplice. Okay, next up, let's talk about his brother, Henry's death. The show has this really dramatic scene where Ed just murders him with a piece of wood. But here's the key. There is zero proof that happened. Now, was his death suspicious? Absolutely. He died during a brush fire, and a biographer later noted he had these unexplained bruises on his head. But the official cause of death was asphyxiation. So what you see on TV? That's a dramatic theory. It's not a confirmed fact.
And this idea of Gein as some kind of criminal mastermind, like a real-life Hannibal Lecter helping the FBI. Total fiction. I mean, yes, a real FBI profiler did interview him, but did he help them catch Ted Bundy? Not even close. The profiler basically said the meeting was useless because Gein was just so psychotic he couldn't offer any real insight into anything.
Now this next one is pretty disturbing, and it's a huge part of the show's drama. They portray him engaging in necrophilia with the bodies he dug up. But the thing is, Gein himself always vehemently denied this, and his reason was as chilling as it was simple. He told investigators the bodies just smelled too bad.
So, if the show kind of beefed up these parts for dramatic effect, you might be wondering, what's the real story? Well, this is where it gets crazy. The unfiltered, 100% factual truth was, in a lot of ways, way more bizarre and disturbing than anything Hollywood could dream up.
And that brings us to the big question. In 1957, the police arrest Gein after a local hardware store owner, Bernice Worden, goes missing. So, what did they actually find when they first stepped inside that farmhouse? What they found inside, it was a house of horrors, a true workshop of human remains. And these weren't just trophies on a wall. We're talking about a wastebasket made of human skin, bowls made from actual skulls, a belt made from female nipples, masks from the skin of female heads, and, most infamously, a full woman suit made of tan skin, supposedly so he could, in his own words, become his mother. The reality was so awful, you couldn't make it up.
And this is a really, really important point to understand. The media loves to call him a serial killer, but that's not quite right. He was something else. Yes, he was a murderer. He killed 2 women, Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden. But most of what was in his house, that came from graves he robbed. He admitted to robbing at least 9 of them. That's why they called him the Plainfield Ghoul. He was a grave robber first.
So that brings us to the end of his story, but also to his real legacy. And that's how the awful truth of what he did ended up shaping the future of horror movies forever.
So what happened to him? Well, the legal side of things was pretty straightforward. Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia. They had a trial, and he was found guilty of murder. But then, in a second hearing, he was ruled not guilty by reason of insanity. He spent the rest of his days locked up in a mental institution, and that's where he died back in 1984.
But this is his real legacy, the part that's still with us today. Just think about it for a second. Norman Bates from Psycho, with that creepy, obsessive relationship with his dead mother, that's 100% Ed Gein. What about Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with his mask made of human skin and his furniture made of bones? All Gein. And Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, who wanted to make a woman's suit out of skin, that is lifted directly from the police reports of what they found in Gein's house. He didn't just commit crimes, he basically gave birth to the DNA of modern horror.
So that really just leaves us with one final question, doesn't it? We've seen how Hollywood took the story and ran with it, adding accomplices and made-up murders for drama. But then you look at the cold, hard facts, the bowls made from skulls, the belt made of nipples, the horrifying desire to literally wear his mother's skin. And you just have to ask yourself, which one is actually more disturbing? The fiction they created, or the unbelievable, horrifying truth?